Blair,
Yes, mate.
you're a man,
Yes.
and you have thoughts and feelings and emotions.
Yes.
Are you good at talking about all that stuff?
Well, I try my best, but I don't know. Probably not as much as I should.
I'm the same. I feel better after getting stuff like that off my chest, but I don't do it anywhere near often enough. Have you heard about Andy's Man Club?
They're brilliant. They create a safe space for men to sit down and talk about the important stuff. And they do it right across the country as well.
Yeah, exactly. They've got more than 200 meetings across the UK, and it's every Monday night at 7 o'clock, including one at Starks Park.
And if anyone wants more information on it, they can go to andysmanclub.co.uk or search for Andy's Man Club on Facebook. It's okay to talk, and now we're going to get back to talking about the Rovers.
Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Yes. This is the Oh No 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 podcast, and we've got a new manager to talk about. Just 8 short days after the out-of-the-blue departure of Neill Collins, we've had the similarly out-of-the-blue arrival of Inverurie local Barry Robson. Joining me this Hogmanay morning to discuss the former Aberdeen manager and his new job with the Rovers. I am delighted to have Blair Hopcroft. First of all, how are you, Blair?
Broke with a cold, but I am here. I am here for it, mate.
Good. That's all we ask of you. We've got Alan Douglas Munn as well. How are you, Alan?
I'm doing all right, mate, yeah. Looking forward to seeing what the new guy brings.
Good stuff. And we've got Scott Fleming as well. How are you, Scott?
Yeah, not too bad. Feel a lot fresher than I did on Sunday anyway when we were recording. But looking forward to just chatting about the new gaffer.
Absolutely. Despite the understandable horror at the revelation that Barry Robson's the kind of freak who listens to loads of podcasts, the reaction to the appointment does look to have been sort of overwhelmingly positive. I think it's fair to say. And Scott, you've been pretty clear in your sort of admiration for Barry Robson for the very beginning, back to when Ian Murray was sacked. So presumably you're pretty pleased with this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just when the list. I mean, we've seen the list there. Was it last week when it officially came out? It was very similar to the list that was going about when Murray got sacked, and so I think that was the thing that probably annoyed a lot of folk. Were going, "Oh Christ, we're having to go through the same names again that we did 5 months ago when Murray was sacked." But I think Robson was the only one that kind of jumped out. I thought, well, he wasn't like an overwhelming success at Aberdeen, but I don't think he did shockingly bad either. I think he was kind of a middle-of-the-road manager, and Aberdeen, to be fair, have went through their fair share of run-of-the-mill managers, especially in the 2000s anyway, but since McInnes. But I think he got them to a cup final and got them third in the time that he was in the caretaker role and then given it permanently. But I just thought he just seemed like a guy that I don't know. I liked his Aberdeen team in terms they looked like they worked really hard, and that's the first thing that we keep going back to, is that we want just to see the team working hard and know that they're putting everything they're going to put into it, and then the results will come with that. But no, I think just overall, I just thought he was the only name that kind of intrigued me in the shortlist. And obviously Collins came out of nowhere and wasn't even on the list. So I think I even took that kind of into consideration, thinking that it could be somebody else. And I'm just glad also that it got done so quickly, to be honest. It gives him now, as he said in his interview, it gives him, 3 weeks to really kind of study the squad and study the people he's got in his dressing room, and then go, do I need to bring anyone else? The answer is yes, we need a striker. But I think it's just yeah, for him, it's a good period to get a full month basically in the window.
Yes. I think I need to kind of declare right out the gate with this that I don't know if like a psychoanalyst would call it Stockholm syndrome or if there's like a better term for it. But as soon as like I see a guy with a Rovers badge on, I'm just like immediately like the most positive interpretation that you could possibly have. Where it's like you get beat 6-0 and I'm like, that was probably unlucky. And it's like, oh, got a 2-1 win over St Mirren though. But I hadn't really looked at his record too much. Sort of like when his name had come up previously, I was sort of happy with the headline almost of like, I know he was Aberdeen manager. I know he wasn't there that long. And then they sacked him. So it was like, well, can't it be very good then? But actually looking at his record in more detail and through what are now, Barry Robson tinted spectacles, whatever that would be.
Ginger.
I mean, it's very easy to make a very kind of positive interpretation for his Aberdeen spell, I think. In terms of like the results, so I can't really speak to the performances. I've not gone back and watched like video of how they played or anything. But he took over from Jim Goodwin and did much, much better. With like the same side, really turned them around because they were abysmal. And you wonder how much of that is actually just, it's the absence of Jim Goodwin by that point with that side. But really, really strong performances with that kind of back end of that season. I think 7 wins in a row and they only conceded 1 goal in that time, something like that. Including, and like that's in the top 6 as well. To kind of finish that season really strong. Then into the first half of the next season is sort of where, again, if you only look at the headlines, where it kind of all fell apart. But they were in Europe and just played like an inordinate amount of games. So I think they'd played 32 games by the time he was sacked in the January. And there are a lot of losses in there, but they pretty much all come off the back of like Thursday, Sundays. Their European results are all really tight as well. It's not like they were going and getting hammered in Europe every week. They beat Eindhoven, I think, in his last European game. And even looking at sort of what happened after he left, I mean, his immediate replacement was Neil Warnock, and they got worse. So I actually think he did better than the guy before him, and he did better than the guy after him. And I think the caveat from that is that Peter Leven then came in after Neil Warnock and had a Barry Robson-esque, very impressive caretaker spell. But that was in the bottom 6. So he won 6 or 7 games on the bounce as well, but the majority of them were against draws, effectively. So I'd say with that caveat of, I realise I'm deliberately taking the most positive interpretation, I was almost expecting worse. Like I was expecting to go, I get sacked because they were 8th, but they lost 4-0, 6 games in a row or something. It's very easy to find the excuses if you're looking for them, which I have been. Alan, what are your initial impressions from Barry Robson?
Yeah, I mean, my feelings on his time at Aberdeen were similar to yours. I mean, I'd actually listened to the BBC's podcast yesterday, and Jackie McNamara was talking about it. It was kind of done as a breaking news thing while they were on, and he was talking about how his results were actually okay, and he struggled to play Thursday, Sunday, which a lot of managers do. Look at St Mirren and Kilmarnock this season; they did terribly after their European games. And Aberdeen last season, I think I put it on Twitter that after 8 European games, they lost 5 of the Sunday games after it. You then look at their other results. They lost against Celtic, they lost against Rangers, they lost to St Mirren, who, for some reason, they just have a really terrible record against St Mirren. So it's not, his record at Aberdeen wasn't horrendous. No, like you, I can't comment on style of play. There's some Aberdeen fans are saying, good luck, you're going to get hoofball, you're going to get this, but then there's others who say they liked him and say we've got a good manager in our hands. You get the same thing with every manager that comes in. You have to take opinions of the fans of the previous team with a massive pinch of salt, We've got the same for Collins. We've had the same for Murray. We've had it all. Every manager we've ever appointed, you get it. He comes across as a good guy. I know they all do it, but I like the fact that he's willing to sit down and give a 12-minute interview with Davey on his second day. These little touches just. Oh, obviously we had the same with Collins, and he's obviously now a dick, so that's maybe not the best indication. But like, I like him. I like Barry Robson. I liked him as a player. He seems a good guy as a manager. Potentially questionable taste in podcasts, unless he listens to this, of course. Then all is forgiven. Maybe he shouldn't actually.
Don't be doing that, Barry.
But on the whole, I'm generally pretty positive about it, and it's not just because of who he isn't as well.
Blair, without taking us too close to the kind of sketchy Native American territory I steered us towards last time, have you got any reservations?
I do. I'm not going to lie. I do, in the sense that on the whole, he's unproven. He's a bit of a gamble, probably more so than what Neill Collins was, but less so than pretty much everybody else that was on the list and was potentially available. So I'm not in any way, shape, or form disappointed or upset about it. I think it's actually a really good appointment. I think he's a good name in terms of, and I mentioned this when we did the Twitter Spaces, in terms of he's had a decent playing career. I think he's the kind of guy that players will want to play for and potentially will want to come to the club to work for, which I think is a good thing. I think he's pretty well liked. He seems to be one of those guys, one of the good old eggs of Scottish football kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, you have to call it like it is. Like you said, you can go and find 10 things in his Aberdeen tenure that make you go, oh, but. Ostensibly, he's pretty unproven. I mean, he's been a manager for all of, 18 months? Not even a year?
Less than that.
Yeah, so he is unproven. I think it's really interesting when you talk about, when Alan mentioned that previous clubs, or Aberdeen really, fans, are saying this, that or the other. Rovers fans will slag off Ian Murray. Like, he got us to the second place finish in a Premier League playoff final. Like, so you kind of listen to that. They'll slag off his style of play. Exactly. Do you know what I mean? And we will, quite rightly too. But the style of play thing, I spoke about it before the Livingston game, that how you play in the Championship and how you play in the Premier League, they're not relevant. They're completely irrelevant actually, unless you're going to go into the Premier League with a squad who can genuinely challenge the Ugly Sisters. You have to play a certain style. You have to be physical. You have to be big and strong, unless you're really, really, really good at keeping the ball. And there are, I can't think of any team who's consistently managed to do that in the top flight in the last, 10, 15 years, for longer than 6 months or a year at the most, because you get figured out. Whereas in the Championship, it's littered with teams who've done it. We did it. Do you know what I mean? It's and Falkirk are doing it now. You can play pretty football and all the rest of it. But how you play in the Premier League and how you play in the Championship, for me, that doesn't matter. I'm not really interested in what Aberdeen fans think in terms of the style. But I think he spoke well. I think he's a good appointment, but it's a bit of a gamble. But it's not. I don't think it's a gamble the board necessarily would have wanted to take, without sounding crass about it. Like, they threw their stock behind Neill Collins, who, for all intents and purposes, wasn't a gamble. He was the most experienced and, highest caliber we could probably attract at that time. They did the safe option. The safe option's away to America. Like, it's time to rip up the rule book and try something different.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. That there's an old, I'm sure it's an Alex Ferguson quote, and I'll get the numbers wrong, but it's basically like, 10% of football is luck. Our job is to control as much of the other 90% as possible. I don't go so far as to say with appointing managers, it's 40% of it is luck.
Yeah.
How many managers do you see, how many jobs do you see that go to guys where you're like, he's going to be terrible, and he actually does all right, or the complete opposite. And as you say, with Neill Collins, probably was the case of actually for all that you could control and all we could have got, probably was about as good as we could get. And it's all disappeared in the space of 3 or 4 months. The feeling I get with Barry Robson is he's a very, very honest guy, very kind of forthright as well. So very much in the mould of, I've done it so you don't have to. I listened to his open goal interview with Simon Ferry yesterday. A good hour and 10 minutes of Simon Ferry going, what was the banter like there? Which is... Shut up, man. Anyway, sorry.
Pretty much.
Personal opinion really sneaking out there.
That sounds awesome.
What's the dressing room like? Anyway, first of all, I should say it's from 5 or 6 years ago, so there's not really anything about his management in it. He mentions like, I want to go into management, and actually the very last thing he says is quite interesting, because he talks about when he was at Aberdeen under Derek McInnes and he was offered a coaching role at Aberdeen, when he could have still played, probably couldn't have still played it for Aberdeen. But he says himself, he's like, I reckon I could have played like bottom half, SPL. And he says, he's like, I'd never fancied like playing lower than that again. But he just kind of drops into conversation. He's like, he got a phone call asking him if he wanted to interview for the Rovers job. So 2018, I think, would be Gary Locke.
Yeah.
I think I'm right. So the 2016, he says, the interview is 2018. He's talking about 2016. I think it's Gary Locke. And he says the Rovers phoned him and said, do you want to interview for this? We've heard that you're looking at getting into management. And he didn't even take the interview because he was like, I'd rather go and do it the right way. And he says it's funny because like his biggest sort of, I don't think mentor would be the right word. I think they were kind of too close to one another in age, but like his biggest comparison was Derek McInnes. And Derek McInnes very much got the St Johnstone job kind of on a whim, like hadn't done his badges, he kind of landed in his lap. But he was like, so he could have gone and done that. But again, bear in mind, this is like 6 years ago. He's like, nah, I would rather go and put the cones out and do all the groundwork first. And almost like he's saying, he's talking about different leadership styles and stuff in his interview yesterday. That kind of thing. Like go and watch different sports, different stuff, build up a portfolio of this is how I want to work before then getting into management. It's interesting to see that sort of how that comes around. It's obviously something he's been looking at for a long time. But in that interview, as I say, very much what it comes across as is very few kind of airs and graces almost. Like he talks about his own career in a really interesting way, because when he's talking about himself being at Dundee United in particular, he's really honest and he's like, I should have moved earlier because I should have been playing for Scotland. And like, that's how I feel. And I think some people would maybe almost hold back on that, but he's like, I knew I was good enough to play for Scotland. And the minute I went to Celtic, I was in the Scotland team every week. And he's like, and I knew I was good enough to do it. But basically, he's like, being at Dundee United held me back. But then by the same token, when he's talking about being at Celtic, he's talking about some of the other guys around them. And he's like Nakamura, he talks about a lot. But he's like light years ahead of me. So there's none of this. It's not like an ego-based thing. He's clearly like, nah, I was better than that. I'm not as good as that. Which I found interesting. It's an interesting kind of insight into his attitude as much as anything. But I wonder actually, Scott, if there was an element of him being a little bit too honest in his Rovers interview with Davey yesterday. Because he was quite open about the fact that he's not seen a lot of the Championship, which would have been a really easy lie. To be like, yeah, I'm totally up on this. I said in that Twitter Spaces yesterday, so I bet Barry Robson watched the Championship all the time. Turns out he doesn't. And even in the way that talking about preparing for air, he said the same thing. He was like, I'll have to find out. He's like, I have to find out about my own squad this week. He's like, and I'll also have to find out about air. Very like, shut up, man. You could have buffed that out.
Or is it a bluff?
Aye.
Maybe it's a double bluff.
Unagi.
Well, that's so. Does that give you any kind of cause for concern, Scott? He's maybe not got a lot of active experience of the division or knowledge of the division. Sorry,
I wouldn't say it's a massive concern. No, I think he's just being honest in terms of saying, look, I'm not going to know every single player in this squad, and I need to see them for myself. Because at the end of the day, he could have lied and says, yeah, I've seen all of them play. And bear in mind, we've got young lads that hadn't even played in the Championship until this season as well. So you've got to think things like that as well. But I think, I'm not overly concerned about it. I'm more interested to see what he thinks in maybe 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time, once he's had 3 weeks of training. He knows what he's seeing. And it wouldn't surprise me if he pulls in likes Lewis Stevenson, Paul Hanlon, Bruni, who's the captain, and says, probably trying to get an idea of what the squad's like and what everybody's like, how everything's been going this season, because he could take it just for word of what he hears and sees and highlights and stuff like that. But he did say he wants to see it for himself, so that's I'm more happy enough for him to just see for himself, and he's the one at the end of the day that's going to be leading us in every game. So he's got to go by how he wants to work and what he sees. So if that's the case, then I'm more than happy with that.
Yeah, and Alan, last week I remember saying about Kai Montague in particular must have been really gutted when Neill Collins left, because he just sort of worked his way kind of into the first team picture. I wonder if now he's delighted, because Barry Robson, surely that's what a kind of a role model or someone to come in and be able to give you tips on how to play your position. The fact that Barry Robson did have, an excellent career. How much do you think that brings to a manager?
It brings a bit of credibility, I think. To if he's standing there on the training pitch and saying, you should be doing this, 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 and this. If they can look back at video footage and see that he's actually done these things himself, and not necessarily all of them. He wasn't a defender, he wasn't a goalie, so he can't do it. But he even things like talking about the attitude and the way you should approach a game. He was a consummate professional, and he went out there and gave everything. So he's got that kind of experience to go back on. He knows what it takes to get to a level above where our players are at the moment. So he's played at a higher level than basically anyone in our squad, other than actually even higher than Hanlon and Stevenson, because he's got multiple Scotland caps. He played for Celtic and he won trophies there. So he's played at a better level than any of our squad. So if they don't take that on board and listen to it, then there's absolutely something wrong with them rather than him, I would say. And I think they'll have been doing that. Guys like Montague have been taking everything in from Hanlon, Stevenson, from Dylan Easton, even Louis Vaughan. Louis Vaughan must be a fantastic mentor to the young guys, to kind of as an example of how to come through ridiculous amounts of adversity and just keep coming back. So there's a lot of good mentors in that squad anyway. But I think Barry Robson will be another one. Even you've got Mickey as well, who's arguably played at an even higher level than Barry Robson.
A really good point.
Having played in the Premier League in England, so I think Barry Robson will definitely bring a lot to that, and I think the players will absolutely respect him. Even guys like Montague, who probably are too young to actually remember him playing.
That's a scary thought. I don't like that. But that, I think, again, to kind of go on like initial impressions as much as anything, I do get the feeling that he is a manager, like in his own playing image, almost.
Yeah.
Like hard work, first and foremost, which is such an easy thing to say. Like there's not a single manager who's ever done an interview at the beginning and been like, actually quite lazy. I think I'll just let the guys slack off, really, last 20 minutes. But I mean, that it does come across as like a genuine cornerstone, like a real let's see, anything I've heard or read from him, it comes up time and again. And I don't think we're short of that by any means at all. But based on, again, I know we're working on pretty small amounts of data. But I mean, are you expecting to see like a big overhaul in the way that this Rover side approaches things? Or do you think we're more of a gradual change as we head into January?
I am expecting to see quite a big shift in the way we approach it. Not necessarily in terms of formations and personnel and stuff, but the big question mark I had over Neill Collins, and I said it a couple of times, was he didn't seem to be able to get them up for it, which felt like a really weird thing. He came across as a really nice guy and really calm and really kind of knowledgeable and stuff. And you could hear him on the sideline going tonto. So it's not like he was dead quiet and demure and all that kind of stuff. No, that at all. But the amount of games where we came out in the first half and just didn't start a game, or started really well and he went in at half time and spoke to them and they came out half asleep. Like, there was something wrong. It was the same under Murray. If I'm being totally honest, it was exactly the same second half of the season, particularly going into the League Cup campaign this year and then into that first game against Airdrie. There just seemed to be a lack of oomph, like something really grit in amongst them. And I do feel like that's what Barry Robson could bring. I've no idea if he does bring it or not, but based on nothing other than his playing career, he's not just a hard worker. He's a bit of a dick. Like, do you know what I mean? One of those kind of, in a good way though, like just a bit of grit about him. Somebody who kind of niggles the opposition a little bit, was never frightened to put a tackle in, rile folk up, like let's go and run through a brick wall for this team. I kind of feel we need that.
Where's
One of those
that?
guys that you hate him if he's playing against you, but love him if he's in your team.
That was really good. All three of us tried to jump in with different cliches about managers there.
It would have been better harmony if we said the same thing.
Yeah, if we don't go with the same one. But yeah, because I was going to say, it sounds like you're kind of working your way around to describing him as a like capital letters proper football man.
Yeah,
and that feels accurate as well.
Does.
Nah, that's woke nonsense.
I mean, I was speaking to my mates about what we were literally chatting, going to the game on Saturday, and one of my good mates was like, I kind of feel like we just need a motivator. Like, we don't need somebody to come in and revamp everything. We just need a motivator. And I was like, you mean like Dick Campbell, but not a dick? He's like, yeah, basically, that kind of thing. You need somebody who'll come in and, I mean, I said it last year, but rattle the tiger cage, get them firing and going for it. And he does kind of feel like that. But at the same time, it feels like there's a bit more behind it than just a good football man. Like,
it's interesting because I completely agree with everything you've just said, but I've only really arrived at that in the last 24 hours. Because my previous impression of Barry Robson, having seen like little clips of him post-match at Aberdeen or heard him on the radio, was like quite a downbeat guy, quite reserved, like not really a shouter and a baller, like that. Actually, I don't think that he's like that at all. I get the feeling he's a guy who will throw some stuff around if he has to, and you wonder how much of that is like, is that like a media training type thing, or has he listened to one too many podcasts about leadership where it's like, look, because there are definitely football managers who feel this way, where like communicating outside the football club is effectively just wasted energy, and you basically just straight back your media interviews. But when you actually hear him talking about the way he works, like, he doesn't come across that way at all. Like that, I think it does sound like it will be that, like, yeah, full kind of motivational first, almost. And that's not to like denigrate him and say like, oh, he doesn't know his tactics or anything. But if I'm going to contrast with Neill Collins, it does feel a little bit like Neill Collins is a bit more of a, like, these are the tactics, this is the strategy first, and then maybe the rest comes in, or maybe Barry Robson's the other way around. Maybe that's not fair. As I say, I've never actually met either of them, but on kind of initial impressions, that's what I'm thinking. Scott, we'll start to wrap up. This is just a wee kind of quicker one. But what are your hopes for the rest of the season? What are you hoping to see from a Barry Robson Rovers side that maybe we haven't seen up till now?
Obviously, well, his first sort of aim is to make sure that we're completely safe as early as possible, and then see can we potentially push into that sort of fourth position. But in terms of the team itself, as long as we're competing in games, working hard, making sure we're in every game that we're in, because games like Falkirk away, we want none of that, because if there's anything close to that, folk will straight away go, well, clearly this guy's no right for us either. But I think, if we can get just a little bit of continuity, looking like we're on the sort of right track, pushing forward, working hard, as I say, I do think Robson comes across as the guy that I'm hoping if we are playing the sort of stuff that like he played as a player, I don't think we'll go far wrong, to be honest. And I think actually Scott Brown might actually be the epitome of a sort of lower level Barry Robson, if you get what I mean. Like, goes into tackles, always sort of in there with a fight in the middle of the park, and can sort of shoot, score a couple of goals and sort of that. So I think I've got a feeling that Barry Robson might like Scott Brown quite a lot, to be honest, as a player, and will be happy to keep him as his captain, I think. But that's the sort of things that I'm hoping to see going forward. Anyway, it does actually, as a manager, remind me, just as you're saying about his interviews, actually about Eddie Howe at Newcastle, very bland with the media. Like, everybody, I think Eddie Howe said it himself, is like, I try to be boring for you guys, and it's probably no fun for you, but at the same time, I don't want any headlines. I just want to do my job. So if that's the sort of guy that you're getting, that's fine.
That's like, I mean, it's as much as it doesn't make for a lot of good stuff to talk about, like, fine. Because it's the kind of thing that I think that would be like my attitude if I was a manager. Would be like, right, I'm going out to do my post-match. None of yous worry about anything that's said out there. Like, that's not for you, that's for the rest of the world. I've just told you what you need to know. Like, I'm going to go out and probably just tell some lies. Tell some boring, say some boring stuff. But it will be interesting to see just at kind of closer quarters what he's like. Because as I say, I really feel like my preconceived notions already seem to have been really quite wrong. And how much of that is actually evidence-based and how much of that is me just, as I said at the start, immediately being like, hey, that guy's got a Rovers badge on. I think he's brilliant, actually. All of a sudden.
I'm with you, 100%.
Yeah. Just one final question, Alan, for you. Again, it seems ridiculous given it was only about 8 days ago, but I remember saying at that point, with Neill Collins leaving, the club felt like a bit of a less attractive proposition than it did early in the season. But given we've won 3 games on the bounce, we've now got a new manager that everybody's kind of, with maybe one or two exceptions, sort of united behind. Do you feel positive? Are you feeling kind of more optimistic about the rest of this season than we maybe were 3 or 4 weeks ago?
Absolutely. I mean, after that Falkirk game, that podcast was, possibly the most negative podcast we've put out in the 120 or whatever that we've done, with very, very good reason. We were awful that day. Yeah. What's actually quite funny, though, is that comes in the middle of a run of 6 wins in the last 9 games. So actually, on the whole, we're doing all right. And it's what we're seeing is that we actually do have a pretty good squad for this level. Some of the players weren't hitting the levels we know they can. They've started to do that a bit more in the last few weeks. We don't look like conceding every single time the team goes forward, like we did in that Falkirk game, to be honest. So there's an awful lot. He's got a lot there to work with. Adding a few more in January, and I'm really positive we can go and have a right go at it in the second half of the season and be worried about the teams ahead of us instead of the teams behind us. And yeah, fourth place looks a wee bit far off just now. We're 8 points behind Thistle. We've still got to play them twice. We're 11 points behind there, but we play them on Saturday and we've got a game in hand. You know, that those gaps, I mean, it wasn't that long ago. Queen's Park looked out of reach. We're now 1 point, I think, behind them with a game in hand. You know, we were a few weeks ago. We were behind Dunfermline on goal difference. We're now, I think, 5 ahead of them, 8 ahead of them, or something with a game in hand. You know,
I think 8.
This league changes really quickly, and I think the beginning of this season was a bit strange. It didn't play out the way people expected to. You know, you had Ayr and Falkirk going on those really good runs, Livingston just kind of steadily going about their business. I think the last few weeks the Championship has turned into the division that we all know it is, properly cutthroat. Almost anyone can beat anyone on the day. Kind of take Airdrie out of that equation probably this season, but it's there to be. If we go on a run or continue the run we're on, there's no reason we can't suddenly find ourselves in that conversation. And I think we will.
Yeah.
But I'm always Mr. Positive, so it's all good.
Well, this is it. Time will tell, but certainly is. I'm in a very, very kind of positive mindset. I think I had more or less kind of written this season off, and it won't take much to put me back into that space again. You know, very quickly this could again just go into the bucket of transitional season. I mean, I think 9 against 1, that's what it will be. But there's just that little bit of like, hey, this could still be something. And that's nice. Nice to have that little bit of kind of positivity.
Even down there, I bet you that appointment's probably going to add 100, 150 maybe onto their away support on Saturday. The amount of folk who are probably thinking, I'll give that a miss, who are now going, oh, actually, Barry Robson's first game, I might go down for this. Little things like that make a difference.
I mean, when was the last time we had a manager making his debut at Ayr? I mean, come on.
Just the third time this season.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, gents, for joining me this morning. We will be back again before the weekend in one form or another, some sort of lineup, to look ahead to that trip to Somerset Park in a little bit more detail, and sort of focus on the game as much as the new manager. We look forward to seeing you again then. If you're listening to this the day it goes out, then enjoy your new year tonight. If you're listening to it tomorrow, then I'm sorry about your hangover. Hopefully it passes soon. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you again. Goodbye.